So to me, the evolutionary psychology perspective explains so much of life. It's basically like being human 101. And in order to understand what makes us human, you have to retrace that whole evolutionary arc. Some things we share with insects and reptiles, some things with other mammals, or only great apes. And then there's definitely some bizarre species level evolution that makes us distinctly human. But once you understand where we picked up all of those building blocks and pieces, it becomes really easy to understand your own behavior. So the books covers a wide variety of stuff, learning, memory, language, gender differences, culture, our highly social natures, all of that's in there, but from an evolutionary perspective.
If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you've heard me and Josh talk about MWI, which is our digital marketing agency. If you're new around here, this may be a first introduction to MWI. We're a full-service digital marketing agency that specializes in everything from website design and development to search engine optimization and all forms of paid advertising, whether it's paid social advertising or paid search advertising, content marketing, digital PR, social media management. Basically anything a business needs to strengthen and grow their digital footprint is what we do over at MWI. The website is mwi.com. And for any listeners of the Hope Strategy podcast, I'd love to offer a free 20-minute consultation with yours truly to talk about your business, to talk about your goals, to understand, what you need to be doing from a digital marketing strategy and action plan standpoint in order to yield some results and grow your business online. So please reach out at mwi.com/hope strategy. That's mwi.com/hope strategy to sign up, and we will be in touch. Now back to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Hope Strategy podcast. And I'm here with Josh Dimley. As always, how are you this wonderful April morning, Josh?
Doing fantastic. That was a great interview.
Yeah, that was. We had a really fantastic conversation with Tim Ash, who is the author of 2 best-selling books on landing page optimization and Chief Strategy Officer of Site Tuners, a strategic conversion rate optimization agency with offices in San Diego and Tampa. Tim has developed deep expertise in user-centered design, persuasion and understanding online behavior, and landing page testing. In the mid-1990s, he became one of the early pioneers in the discipline of website conversion rate optimization. Over the past 20 years, Tim has helped a number of major U.S. and international brands to develop successful web-based initiatives. I believe he said his company has generated over $1.2 billion in revenue for these companies and the others that he's worked with. Companies like Sears, Google, Expedia, eHarmony, Facebook, American Express, Canon, Nestle, Symantec, Intuit, Autodesk, Yahoo, and many other companies have benefited from Tim's deep understanding and innovative perspective. Today, in addition to providing strategic consulting services, Tim is a highly regarded digital marketing keynote speaker and presenter at industry conferences worldwide, including Content Marketing World, Dreamforce, Inbound, Internet Retailer, Affiliate Summit, Shop.org, PubCon, SMX, and countless others, which is where, I think that's where you met him originally, right?
Yep, we met at a conference.
He is the founder and chairperson of the International Digital Growth Unleashed event series, formerly Conversion Conference, and a frequent contributor to print and online publications such as ClickZ, Website Magazine, Visibility, and others. Since 1995, he has authored more than 200 published articles. In addition, Tim is the online voice of conversion optimization as the host of the Landing Page Optimization podcast on cranberry.fm. Tim has been mentioned by Forbes as a top 10 online marketing expert and by Entrepreneur Magazine as an online marketing influencer to watch. He earned his dual major Bachelor of Science degree with highest distinction in computer engineering and cognitive science from UC San Diego while studying on under a UC Regent Scholarship, the highest academic scholarship awarded by the UC system. During his PhD studies at UC San Diego, he also earned his master's degree in computer science. That was a long bio. Tim has accomplished a lot. His recent book, the one that just came out, it's been out for a while now on audio and ebook, but just came out paperback, is Unleash Your Primal Brain. And we talked quite a bit about that. Tim is an expert in psychology.
Oh, it's kind of like evolutionary psychology, or at least that's what he loves to get into. He loves to explore how things evolved and what that means for how we do things today or how we should behave. Like we talked about sleep and evolution and why we sleep the number of hours we do as humans versus other animals, and how we need different amounts of sleep at different ages. It was really kind of a wide-ranging discussion, wasn't it?
It really was. Yeah, we talked about a lot. And he's, we heard his story. His family's he was born in Moscow and fled the U.S.S.R. and ended up with a really cool story about just a chance answering of a phone call in the 70s that led his family to ending up in the U.S. and changed, obviously, the trajectory of his life. His success as an entrepreneur, but also a lot of the realities that he's come to as he's built successful businesses and realized what's most important to him in his life. It was very wide ranging, but again, very insightful. And Tim is so well spoken. He's spoken all over the world and he's super smart. So yeah, we really enjoyed that conversation. I guess I'll speak for both of us. I really enjoyed that conversation.
I enjoyed it too. It was great.
Right. Well, please enjoy this conversation with Tim Ash.
Something is happening in our world.
Time is very precious.
I'm going to show you how great I am.
Hope in the face of difficulty.
More than machinery, we need humanity.
Hope in the face of uncertainty.
I'm better now than I was. I'm experienced now.
Changing the world can happen anywhere, and anyone can do it.
The audacity of hope.
This is the Hope Strategy Podcast with Corey Blake and Josh Steinley.
Give us that story, Tim. Tell us a little bit about how you got started in life and where you come from so that people can understand your background.
Wow. Well, I was born in a country that no longer exists. The former, U.S.S.R. back in the U.S.S.R. in Moscow. And my family decided to emigrate when I was about 8 years old and my younger brother was 5. So my dad was had an ethnically Jewish background. My mom was ethnic Russian, but in Russia, there's a lot of anti-Semitism, still is to this day. And so my dad had a 4.0 out of high school, but he couldn't get into this aviation institute that he wanted to go to for college because they considered Jews to be a security risk, that kind of stuff. So he knew that if we stayed there, my brother and I would have like a lifetime of discrimination. And so he just pulled the pin and said, well, we're outie.
So now we're talking about the USSR. We're talking pre-1989 here.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, the movies I watched when I was a kid made it look like it's really hard to get out of the USSR. So what's the story there? How did you guys actually leave?
That was the point. It was like they just cracked the door. This is in the early 1970s, and they just there's a lot of international pressure. You have to start letting Jews out. And at the time, there were like 4 countries that were accepting Soviet refugees: and U.S., Canada, Israel, of course, which is where you were supposed to go, and Australia. And so we were in Rome in Italy, and my dad calls up his uncle. This is like on a transatlantic collect call to his Madison Avenue apartment. And of course, like all good Jews, Uncle Saul's vacationing in Florida because it's wintertime. And so they actually forwarded the call to him. And my dad's like, hey, Uncle Saul, it's Sasha. And we're in Rome and we're thinking of going to Canada. I mean, it didn't seem any colder than Russia, right? And my great uncle goes, hey, come to America. I'll take care of everything. So that 5-minute conversation is why I'm in the US and I'm not Canadian. Hey?
Isn't that amazing to just think about how your entire life hinged on that 5-minute phone call?
Yeah. And the fact that it was connected, which is crazy.
Yeah. I mean, you could have been a Canuck. You could have been an Aussie.
Making all kinds of bad jokes about Timbits. That's like Tim Hortons, donut holes. Don't get me started.
How old were you at that point?
I was 8 and my little brother was 5.
Okay. So you can remember all this then. And that is, it wasn't 2020 where it's like, oh, I missed the call. I'll just call him back on WhatsApp in 5 minutes and see if I catch him. Or,
that's right.
I'm going to look on Instagram and see where they're vacationing so I know where to reach him. Right. That was the fact that call got connected and that then he answered on vacation in a hotel somewhere else or wherever he was.
I mean, and this was the days of like, this is costing $3 a minute kind of stuff. I mean, it was a big deal back then. Yeah.
So you came straight to New York from
we settled in Albany, New York, where my great uncle had a business. And so the manager of that business helped set us up. And my parents had transferable job skills. They were civil engineers, both of them. So it was kind of like the software engineers of the day, same populations, like anybody educated, the Indians, Chinese, Russians that were coming in with those kind of degrees, you pretty much had a job right away. And so they had a good second run, in the U.S. working for large engineering firms. So I could say landed pretty well. I mean, neither of them spoke English. That was kind of rough, but for us kids, it was just like they stuck us in public schools. We were fluent 3 months in, and they held me back a grade. We got here in February, so I was supposed to be in third. They held me back to second grade, and then the following fall advanced me to fourth. And fifth grade, I won the spelling bee. So, it was pretty easy if you're a little kid to assimilate.
Yeah.
It's funny, Tim, Gary Vaynerchuk often talks about how immigrants have an advantage in the U.S. because they work harder and stuff like that. It's also funny that his dad's name is Sasha and that he also comes from the former U.S.S.R. But what are your thoughts on that? Being an immigrant yourself, children of immigrants, do you feel like that gave you any sort of advantage over your, shall we say, lazier U.S. peers?
Well, yeah, and I wouldn't call it lazy. I'd say not seeing all the gifts you're given. If you grow up in swimming in the U.S. culture, you don't understand the unique advantages. Some of the unique advantages of it is that there also a really nasty, harsh, unforgiving underbelly to it, no doubt. But I'd say it is an advantage because you're always kind of like comparing things like, oh, this is not something set in stone. This is something that people made a choice about, and people in other places make different choices. So it gives you a more flexible mind. I think also being bilingual has been shown to be a huge advantage in many circumstances. But specifically in terms of entrepreneurship, I read this big study of successful entrepreneurs, and there are 5 factors. It was male, firstborn, immigrant, Jewish, and not having an advanced degree. Like if you had all 5 of those, I had 4 of those. I tried to go for my PhD and, was in the PhD program for 7 years before I quit. But I'm like, I got everything except that no advanced degree thing.
That's fascinating. And if you even just look, I'm just thinking as he's talking about the interviews that we've done so far, we've had quite a few immigrant stories. The episode that went live today for the podcast is Audrey Gruss, who was born in Lithuania. Her parents, and her parents fled, Lithuania to France and to Germany, and then eventually ended up in the States. Anyways, her story is the same. I think she was 5 or 6 when they left. And it's just, I guess it's kind of an extra chip on your shoulder, right? Like in a good way to say, you have that perspective of what you have to be grateful for and where the opportunity lies. And you see opportunities in places that other people wouldn't, because it's just the norm. It's just what it is. Right. And when you can see those opportunities,
it really pisses me off during this cultural moment that there's to me, America was the melting pot, new blood is being brought in, that dynamism, no matter who it was in past waves of immigrants, they've always been a net positive to this country. So to hear all of this crap, I got a t-shirt, a little while ago, it says, keep the immigrants, deport the racists. That's pretty much my stance on it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's funny how it just switches which group it is. I mean, it used to be the Italians and it was the Irish, and today it's Mexicans. It's
the
like
Jews, couldn't go to Harvard till the 50s or 60s. It's like there's always someone to discriminate against. But every time, if they've done an economic analysis, it's always been a huge net plus. So. In fact, we see that pretty much every country's long-term fortunes depend on the demographics, or rather the age demographics of the country. And if you don't have a lot of dynamic young people coming in, you kind of decline. You see this in places like Japan, for instance. They have an aging population and no immigration. So, we have this good setup in the West, or most of our government works properly. But if we don't start importing even more people to take advantage of those resources, we're actually setting up for a decline. I mean, that's macroeconomically, that's pretty much guaranteed.
Yeah. So going back to your story. So you're 8 years old, you come here, children of immigrants, your parents are able to get good jobs, you're in the education system and everything. So then how did you become an entrepreneur and decide this? And you just told us that you actually went for a PhD for 7 years. I mean, give us some of this background. Like, how did you stumble into, or intentionally get into starting your own business?
Well, actually, the educational part's tied to my decision. So we moved around Albany, New York, Ann Arbor, Michigan, then Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which is near Philadelphia. That's where I finished out high school. And I got a full ride UC Regent scholarship on the beach in California at University of California, San Diego, a rocket ride of a school with a great reputation. They had a new beach next door. It's like, come on, I'm there. So I move out here. I stayed there for undergrad and grad school, but I worked at various companies along the way, and a big defense contractor called SAIC, NCR Corporation. And I just realized that, big companies were not for me. So here I am, I'm 29. I'm still in school towards the end of my PhD. And I'm like, I'm not going to start the fourth decade on this planet still going to school. I'm just not. At that point, I had my fit of entrepreneurial insanity and said, I'm going to start my own company. So I took down 2,000 square feet of space, got a phone line, bought a desk and a computer, and started my first company. And
this was what year?
95. So just shortly after Al Gore invented the interwebs. So it was still a kind of a cottage industry, I would say.
And was that the business Site Tuners that we'll get into? Was that business, or was it a predecessor? Or
it was a predecessor. The company was called Future Focus, and it was essentially a .com incubator. We would start new businesses. We'd help them raise first rounds of financing. We'd often serve as an acting CTO on their team to round it out. It was Wild West stuff. We were building database-driven websites, which was really, crazy talk back in those days. And so it was a lot of fun, but a lot of froth. I could wallpaper my house with all the stock certificates I got that never panned out.
I've got at least one of those. So 1995, I mean, for kids who were born during the internet age and didn't grow up, don't really know life before it. It's like, it literally was this Wild West time. And even today, starting an internet-based incubator is still super risky. A lot of VCs would look at that and just be like, well, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. But in 1995, we didn't even know if the internet was going to work out. Like, we didn't know if it'd be around in 5 years, at least not in the same type of thing it seemed to be in 1995. What was it that made you think, hey, I can start this business and do this incubator and this internet thing, and this is all going to be great? Like, where did that optimism come from?
Well, I think, since the theme of your podcast is hope. I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with my personality. I'm very optimistic. I think I've always had generally an optimistic chemistry and brain constitution. I've only been depressed a couple of times in my life, and that's been situational based on what was going on for me. But I was just like, this is the same thing as the printing press. This is that kind of leap, that kind of discontinuity, and it's going to happen really, really fast. So I said, I'd rather be in front of this wave than behind it. And a lot of it also had to do with that screw academia. I have nothing left to prove to these people. It was more inertia. Like, my dad got his PhD, my mom had her master's. So of course I'm going to get my PhD, But then I woke up one day and I said, I really need to be doing something that I actually enjoy instead of finishing up my thesis.
And had you acquired some skills? I mean, it's just hard for me to imagine 1995, like, there were no web designers, like hardly anybody knew how to design a website or do anything online. Like, how did you have any skills that were necessary to start this type of business?
Well, yeah. So just to give you a little context for the young kids, we had acoustic coupling modems. It's like, 1200 baud. Yeah, good times. You put your phone handset into the coupler, and that's how you get your connection. When I was going to UCSD, that's how we dialed into the internet. It wasn't even web based.
I remember those. I mean, that's like the movie War Games. Remember that? Like,
yeah, exactly. So I'm a Gen Xer.
I know that from is that movie.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm a Gen Xer, loud and proud. Okay, there we go. The thing that the background, I actually had, in retrospect, the perfect background for starting a career in internet marketing. My undergrad majors were computer engineering and cognitive science. So the software and the wetware, if you will. the qualitative and the quantitative. Well, that's internet marketing right there. Everything we do is infinitely measurable and can be tracked. And at the same time, marketing has always relied on human psychology. So if you don't have a deep grounding in how to persuade people, you know, it wouldn't work. But so basically I was training for a career that didn't exist. My graduate work was in neural networks, what you'd call deep learning or AI these days. So it was, again, that combination of the technical with the psychological, I guess.
All right. Now I've got the fun question for you here, which is, knowing what you know now, having been through the whole internet growth thing and all this and seen Facebook and Twitter and Google and all this stuff, if you could travel back to 1995 with the knowledge that you have today, what business would you start in 1995?
Oh, man, that's a great question. It would not be a professional services firm. So let me start by process of elimination, because one of the things I realize is my highest and best use on the planet is not running an agency. That's the second hardest business model behind doing live events and conferences, which I also did for 10 years, ran an international conference series called Conversion Conference here and in Europe.
And so having run both of those types of businesses, I know where you're coming from. Amen.
Yep, exactly. You know, I feel your pain, brother. No, so I would say that the one thing, and it didn't have to do with the market conditions or the time or any of that other stuff we've talked about. The one thing I wish I'd done differently is been more true to myself and my nature. I'm sure you've done some kind of personality typing test. Well, I'm an ENFP and an Enneagram 7 and what else? High dominance and influence on DISC. You know, basically they all say the same things from different perspectives. And so what I wish I'd done then is what I'm doing now, which is put myself in an environment where I'm not trying to build an empire. I'm not trying to have employees or clients or recurring revenue or whatever the business model is, and just focus on what floats my boat as a person. Where do I add the most value? And that's being of service and of teaching and helping. And so I don't need a company to do that. And that's why writing books, keynote speaking all over the world, and consulting solo, sharing my perspective is where I've landed. I wish I'd done that 20 years ago.
It's interesting to hear you say that, because yesterday we interviewed Will Reynolds, who founded Seer, another digital marketing agency.
Great guy out of Philly. Yeah,
great guy. His company's up to 200 employees, but he's telling us how he didn't want to grow beyond 10 employees when he started it. Mm-hmm. And it's never been his goal to grow. He's never been looking at it saying, I want to have a $10 million company. I want to have a $20 million company. That was never his intent. He loves seeing people grow. He loves serving. He loves supporting the charities he's able to support through his business. And that's what really drives him. And then the money has been kind of secondary. And that kind of hit hard for me, because when I started my business, I was like, I'm going to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30 and I want to grow this business.
Yep. I was supposed to be retired 5 years ago, based on my own timeline.
Yeah. And I look at this and I'm like, you know, listening to Will and talking with you here, like, it's not the money that really drives me. It's these other things. It is seeing people grow. It's seeing people progress. It's also, I mean, it's fun to build something and it's fun to see money come in, but I feel like I've spent too much of my business career in that money driven mode. And I'm starting to realize more and more that not only is that kind of boring and not a thing that really should drive any of us, but I also think there's something about this connection with true meaning or better meaning or purpose and the financial success that you're seeking. It's almost like the more you chase the financial success, the more you lose it. And when you figure out, no, I just want to do this because I'm being true to myself, it seems like money seems to find you when you're not focusing on it or when you least expect it.
Yeah, you know, it's funny because a couple of years ago, I went through this fantastic initiation weekend through a great organization called the Mankind Project. It's called the New Warrior Training Adventure. And on this weekend, one of the things we did was come up with, or in my case, renew our personal mission statement for life. And so mine is, I create a world of peace, safety, and love through joyous expression and service. That's my mission. And it's really easy to tell. That's like a North Star thing. Am I on mission or am I off? And if it's chasing money, that clearly doesn't have anything to do with what I just said, right? And so I'm just going to do that, that joyous expression and service, and then the rest follows.
We talked with Will. We talked with Will yesterday about Tony Hsieh, rest in peace. But we were talking about that process for him, who, as he, and I think Will had done an interview or something that I had read before, even talking with him yesterday. But talking about how selling your business isn't always the best option. But as entrepreneurs, especially in the past 20 years and stuff, it's like build to sell, right? Like you build a company, build it up as big as you can, sell it for as much money as you can, and then right off into the sunset is kind of the story arc that people are trying to get to. But Will had said in this thing that I'd read from him before that he had the opportunity to sell for quite a bit of money 4 or 5 years ago. And one of his greatest advisors or mentors or something said, I don't think that's the best thing for you. And he's like, what? And he loved it because it was counterintuitive to what everything he had always heard was. He's like, what are you talking about? And they're like, well, you're so fulfilled in this. It's, I mean, why would you get rid of it? And a lot of times people chase the money, and then only to find out that when it doesn't lead to the happiness that they were always looking for. And then that in and of itself can be very depressing and debilitating. And, so.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, what we have are these cultural tribes, and the entrepreneur tribe, or the, growth at any cost tribe, I mean, is its own kind of disease, if you will. I mean, we're all pivoting and scrumming our way to unicorn land. It's just, let's face it, we're not curing cancer here. Okay. We're just, if you're a more effective marketer and you grow business, you're taking a consumer's money and taking it out of the pocket of your potential competitor and putting it in your own bank account. Big freaking deal. So Josh, I understand what you meant earlier, just not that fulfilling. I mean, marketing is not like some transcendental meaning in life, and you're never going to get that. So I think the earlier someone gets on that path of what gives me juice and what gives me meaning in my life, the more aligned they'll be with their purpose. And then you tap into larger energies. I don't mean to sound all Californian on you, but larger available energies of other people and things in the universe. And then things will manifest. I don't mean like, Santa give me a red bicycle for Christmas kind of manifest, but you're just in that flow state a lot more often.
Yeah. So is this where you were mentally when you started the business in 95, or is this a progression over the years that you've come to this realization where you are today?
No, it's definitely a progression, because back then it was like, okay, I had the goals. I'm going to buy a plasma TV. I'm going to buy a Mercedes. I'm going to build my dream house. Well, I did all three of those things. By the way, plasma TVs were like $5,000 back in the day, and I was the first on my block to have one. But it doesn't do anything for you. Like the goals I have now are more completely open-ended. They're not closed-ended goals about punching my ticket or selling the business. So I say, for example, I'm going to be much more honest in all of my communication with people, even at the risk of vulnerability or exposing weaknesses. I'm trying to do that on this show with you guys right now. It doesn't matter. Is it business? Is it personal? No, it's just me sharpening that edge for myself.
So, I love processes. The producer of the podcast was telling me, I was asking him once we had gone like 20 episodes or something, and I was asking him like, are there any trends or something you're seeing? Are we saying something too much or something? And he's like, you always love talking about processes. Like he was like, you say process 10 times an episode. So here you go, Tom. There's some more processes for you today. But when I have so much appreciation and respect for, you can hear it in your voice, the intent and the work and the process that you've gone through to get to this place. You can tell that it's very, very sincere. But I know that is not an easy process. And like Josh said, from 95 to 2020, this transition you've made is one full of ups and downs and highs and lows and trial and error. So
you've earned it.
Yeah. So what do you practice? So for, the listener out there that is at the very, very beginning of this journey, that's listening to this and saying, well, geez, I'm just graduating college, or I'm in college and I want to do what fulfills me. I want to avoid, the 25 years of doing things, chasing a dream that's not going to fulfill me. Or maybe for the person that's well on their way in that, but what are you practicing, and what processes have you implemented in your day-to-day routine, in your day-to-day life, that are allowing you to stay in that flow and keep your focus on those goals?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that let me go off on something a little bit related, which is that absolutely, I've taken my lumps, I paid my dues. I had conversations with my wife a couple of times. I had 2 kids, 17 months apart, and I was like, well, if you don't make this much money out of your agency by such and such a date, you have to go get a real job. So that happened several times, and
I can relate to that.
Yeah, and it wasn't like just some financial success or anything like that. I would have made a lot more money in corporate America had I stayed there for 25 years. So financially, it's stressful. That's its own kind of low-grade cortisol drip that has all kinds of bad effects on relationships and health and everything else. So you kind of have to earn things, and I think there is no shortcut. And I don't know if I can save anyone. Maybe I can save them a couple of years out of that 25, but everyone has to take their own lumps because we only learn from our own experience. As much as, again, as a parent, as I'd like to have my kids avoid a lot of pitfalls, nope, they're just like falling into those potholes. They're giant ones, swallowing them up, and I can't help them. So I think learning is pain. Learning is, it didn't work out, and so I have to do something different or take the lesson out of that. And hopefully if you're smart, you at least get the lesson. So you either get what you want or you get the lesson. And hopefully you're taking advantage of the lessons. So, but to answer your question, Corey, in terms of my own self-care practices at this point, foundational is sleep. Really underrated. People talk about diet, exercise. Sleep is daily life support. There's no form of life on the planet that lives more than a few days that doesn't have some form of sleep. It's just not optional. So if you think you can take your phone and, binge watch another show or something like that and have that blue light flickering in your face, you're killing yourself literally. So
what's the sleep? How much sleep?
7 to 9 hours. And that's really high intensity for people. Like our great ape cousins need 10 to 15 hours. We had to compress it when we came out of the trees because it's much more dangerous on the ground. So our sleep is supporting a much more complicated brain and doing it in a much shorter time frame. And that last hour and a half sleep cycle, it goes in about 90-minute cycles, is where you get half of your REM sleep for the night. It's tail weighted. So if you think you're okay on 6, no, you're not. 2 nights of 6-hour sleep is the same as missing a full night of sleep.
I've lived there and I've felt it. And
this is a topic of conversation at our house a lot right now because we've got a almost 2-year-old and a 3-month-old. So same as you, that back to back 17, 18 months. And so trying to make sure that sleep, because we've seen that with the other kids too, is it catches up to you. There is no outrunning a lack of sleep. It is going to catch up to you at some point, and your body is going to have to catch up.
That's right. So my teenage kids, they're on vampire schedule. They actually go to a later schedule than adults. So they go from an early schedule, like young kids, right to a later schedule. And I'm like, 10 o'clock, good night, kids, because my body wakes me up at 6. Another thing I've started doing is electrical grounding. It's called earthing. Turns out that the whole planet's negatively charged and collects ions from the sun. I know it sounds again a little airy-fairy, but
now you're getting really California on us.
Well, but here's the basics. I'll break it down science-wise for you. We're designed to be electrically grounded because we're supposed to be walking on the earth with bare feet all the time and sleeping on it. As soon as you stop doing that, you're not grounded anymore. Then you have free radicals, which is an unpaired proton, basically. So that causes all kinds of bad stuff to happen in your body, inflammation-based things. And so we're living in insulated houses, wearing rubber shoes, driving around in insulated cars on rubber wheels. We're never grounded. So unless you're walking around on the grass in the wintertime, that's probably not likely. You're screwing up this basic anti-inflammatory thing that being grounded gives you. So I got a couple of grounding pads, just plug them into the grounding wire in an outlet. Have one under my desk. I have my foot on right now, another one on my bed. So at least I'm getting a few hours a day of being electrically grounded.
So how does that work? That's it.
There's nothing. I mean, but I actually have a voltmeter, and before I did this, I'm sitting here surrounded by monitors and computers, and I was at 1.2 volts positive charge sitting at my desk. And as soon as I put my foot on the pad, it grounds to 0. So I'm electrically grounded.
So you can actually monitor it.
Yeah.
This is interesting.
There's something called the Earthing movie. If you want to check it out, just look up on YouTube the full movie. It's about like an hour and a half. Documentary, fascinating. The Earthing movie.
I feel like I'm just learning about something that everybody else knows, and I'm like, am I the only one who doesn't know about this? I mean, I'm even from California, and I don't know about this.
Well, this is like, so this started in the 50s and 60s when people started wearing sneakers. That a lot of these like dementia, heart disease, all of these rheumatoid arthritis, all these things kicked up. They're all inflammatory processes, which is basically at a cellular level, your body's not grounded.
I'm curious on this real quick. So to keep down on this, so the what is the effect of if you were to get bare feet and go out and walk in the grass, or go lay down and take a nap in the grass, versus the grounding pad? I mean, is it?
It's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. It's just more convenient because I do still live in my house.
Yeah.
So I wanted to access the.
Glad to hear you didn't move out to a tent with
yeah, that's right.
So how do you test it? How do you get the?
Well, I actually had a little voltmeter, so I'm like, I just put one end in the grounding thing and in my outlet ground, and the other one, put it in my mouth, and that was 1.2 volts.
Oh, okay. So it'll tell you that. Okay.
Wow. Be careful doing this at home, kids.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a voltmeter. It's not like it doesn't carry electricity on its own. It's just measuring.
I've heard of this. What did you say the documentary was called?
It's called The Earthing Movie.
The Earthing Movie. Okay. I've heard a little bit about this, but that's fascinating and that's interesting. So do kids need more sleep? I mean, how much more sleep do kids need? Because I remember we were just talking with my niece the other day, and I remember as a kid sleeping in forever, but it was like I needed it. I need like that.
Basically, the younger you are, the more sleep you need. So kids sleep 12, 13 hours a day when they're babies. You're going through that now. Yeah. But teenagers also need more sleep than adults, and theirs is shifted later so they can individuate away and have time with their peers. Basically, once the adults go to sleep, they have peer time. That's what it's evolutionarily designed for. So, but this later schedule has been shown to improve school performance, mental health, all kinds of stuff. Luckily, here in California, we just switched in San Diego. It used to be like elementary school was 7:45, middle school was 7:25, and high school was 7:15. Now they flipped it where you're not even allowed to start high school except in the 8:30 to 9 range. So that really helps those, especially teenagers who are on that later sleep schedule. Yeah, so all the science is there about that.
So I feel like this ties in really well to your book, Unleash Your Primal Brain. So, and that's what the subtitle, Demystifying How We Think and Why We Act. There it is right there. This seems to tie in really nicely. This is obviously something that you're super interested. So tell us about the book.
Well, as I mentioned, my background was in cognitive science and how the brain works. I've always had an interest in that. And I applied it to marketing for 25 years. In fact, my former agency, Site Tuners, we created $1.2 billion in value for our clients. And it was mostly using these kind of durable, I guess what you'd call neuromarketing techniques that don't depend on the tactics or the technology. They're more about how the brain works and things that we all universally share. So I applied psychology to marketing, but really I was just interested in the psychology itself. So to me, the evolutionary psychology perspective explains so much of life. It's basically like being human 101. And in order to understand what makes us human, you have to retrace that whole evolutionary arc. Some things we share with insects and reptiles, some things with other mammals or only great apes. And then there's definitely some bizarre species level evolution that makes us distinctly human. But once you understand where we picked up all of those building blocks and pieces, it becomes really easy to understand your own behavior. So the books covers a wide variety of stuff, learning, memory, language, gender differences, culture, our highly social natures, all of that's in there, but from an evolutionary perspective.
Do you follow, or are you a fan of Jordan Peterson?
I've certainly seen some of his lectures and read some of his stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, a lot of that seems to be kind of in the same vein. I mean, obviously he's a clinical
psychologist. Yeah. So, but I think, we operate, how there's myths. 500 years ago, the myth was the world is flat, and Columbus luckily didn't sail off the edge of it, right?
Yeah.
Or that human slavery is okay. We're still fighting that battle. But, so these myths get busted, but there's still myths that are 2,000 years old that are operating about the nature of the human mind. So Descartes back in the 1700s said, I think, therefore I am. As if like rational thought is the epitome of what makes us human, the crowning achievement. And it's not. It turns out, the conscious mind is only activated a small percentage of the time, and we're operating on all of that shared evolutionary machinery that other animals have had for hundreds of millions of years. So the center of gravity I'm trying to shift is like understand how that subconscious, more primitive part of the brain works, because that's what rules the day.
One of the things that we talked about before as we were talking about this, I remember still, and I think it was at that conference that this it was a content marketing conference. Is that what it was?
Yeah, content marketing conference in Boston run by my good buddy Byron White.
Yeah, so I remember Josh and I partnered up in 2013-ish, and so I was still, I want to say it was 2015, I think it was, and maybe somewhere in there. And so, but I remember coming and watching your lecture and listening to your talk. And I think you had one of the breakout sessions, like an hour and a half or something, where it was a little more, intense. And you opened up my eyes. I would like to say that the way that you've expanded your expertise on all this psychology and the psychology of marketing and all this, I'm definitely way lower than you. But naturally, I studied, cultural anthropology and communications in college, and so I'm fascinated by it. And I remember listening to you talk and thinking, oh yeah, they're like, you were talking about the colors and the layout and where you put things and why you put them there, and the organization and flow of a website from a UX or user experience standpoint, and how that can increase conversions. And it just was eye-opening to me. And then I went and read a bunch of your stuff and watched a bunch of your stuff. So thank you, because it's really helped us as an agency. One of the things about what we do for work is that when we talk about a website, or when we see a website, we see something different than what your normal consumer sees when they're browsing the web and they come across a website, right? We're looking at things completely differently. Obviously, you to the extreme. I mean, I know you have a service where people will just pay you to come and tear their website apart, right? Where the expert
website reviews. In fact, I guarantee those. If you don't like what I say, I'll give you all your money back. But
yeah, and I love that. I love doing that as well. We do that as part of consulting for our company, where it's just like, hey, we're going to just be real honest with you and walk you through this. But walk us through from an entry level standpoint. Again, assuming that your average Joe who is a consumer and is looking at a website, and or maybe is an entrepreneur looking to build a website or something. Walk us through foundationally how all of this psychology ties into the internet, specifically websites and user experience, and the way that we interact with the things that we're seeing online.
Well, sure. So I've heard this kind of like distinction of business to consumer and internet marketing, or business to business, B2B versus B2C. Well, isn't B2B different? And like I'm operating at the level with evolutionary psychology where this is the human brain. We all have one, or hopefully most of us anyway, 8 billion of us on the planet. And this is what we share in common. So I'd rather work at that level on the durable, evergreen strategies and approaches that are going to make a good marketer have a good career, rather than focusing on the technology. Okay, it's 140 character tweets now. It's hologram suppositories tomorrow. I don't know what the technology is going to be. It doesn't really matter. But the thing that we're trying to influence is the human brain, and effectively on the time scale of evolution, it's frozen in time and isn't changing. So I want to just focus on those persuasion strategies that work universally. And I think that has the highest payoffs. And unfortunately, everyone's focused on the technology and the latest flash.
But that comes down to the color schemes, the layout, the organization, the flow, the structure. If I'm looking at your website right now, and I love looking at your website because it's changed since I've looked at it before, and I love looking at it knowing that you really very intentionally and very specifically went in from a CRO standpoint and conversion rate optimization standpoint and organized it the way that you did. I mean, what are those key things that you're looking for to help a website be?
Yeah, absolutely. So the key theme through this is that we're too much inside of our company. So we're there and we're broadcasting out to the world. It's like, my company is great. And if you only knew how great we were, you'd buy our stuff yesterday, and we're great. We're great. We're weeing all over our website visitors. And, unless you're Trump and you pay for that, most people don't like that. Okay. So I don't know if you want to edit that out, but you can leave it in. So, the main perspective that I'm trying to create is start from the outside in, go from the needs. There's people out there. understand who they are. And then they're coming to you. They may have misconceptions, problems. They're busy. They have the attention span of a lit match. Start there. Okay. Now, how do you present what they need? So it's this inversion. As marketers, we're thinking from inside out, and we need to start thinking from outside in. So the very first thing you need to do as a marketer is identify your audience. Okay, that's critical. As I hear this from companies all the time, well, we can do anything for anybody. Well, then I won't remember it. Okay. Instead, what you need to do is say, hey, what is the target audience? What do they value? And only then design products. Remember that step 3 is designing the products or services and messaging to attract them to those products. So unless you know who you're selling to and what they value, how could you possibly know what to sell them or how to attract them?
I mean, part of what you're saying here, Tim, is there's no one size fits all rule for here's how you design a website to be awesome, because the first question is, well, who are you and who's your audience and what are you trying to get them to do? That's going to determine everything. That's going to change everything. You can't just say everybody should have a header that looks like this, or everybody should have a button here. Because it all depends, right?
Yeah, there's conventions about layout and having a hamburger menu, those little 3 bars in a mobile website. So there's usability conventions that are pretty standard, and you don't want to piss into the wind. But in terms of attracting the people, they really let me tell you a quick story. This is an objective story. Okay, so the matador saw the charging bull and deftly sidestepped a few inches and then plunged his sword between the shoulder blades of the beast, killing it instantly by striking its heart. Okay, now that's an objective story, right? Now, depending who I tell that to, we're going to have 2 very different reactions. On the one hand, someone in Spain who loves bullfighting, that sees this as man versus brute nature, as someone being an impeccable warrior's tradition, all of this good stuff wrapped up in it. You talk to someone from People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, PETA, and they're going to think it's wanton animal torture and murder being subsidized by gleeful, disgusting spectators, and it should be stopped immediately. I just told you the same story. So unless you know who your audience is, you have no clue what the reaction is going to be to your story. The story basically stories, one of their functions is tribal cohesion. They reinforce the values of your tribe. So unless you know what tribe you're talking to, you're going to be way off base in most circumstances, or at best neutral and forgettable. So our job as marketers is to find that niche, understand those people, where they live psychologically, and only then figure out how to message them and sell them stuff. So that's one aspect. But you're absolutely right. There are more universal usability conventions and other things like that in terms of website uses, and a lot of unforgivable sins. I talk about them in my landing page optimization book that are pretty endemic. Most of them stem from not having this deep understanding of your audience.
What I like about this is that I think the process a lot of people take when they're going to build a website is they go around, they look at websites and say, here's a website and I like how it looks. It looks professional. So I'm going to copy this website, or
hey, let's be like Amazon.
From this website,
right?
Because I like how it looks.
Yep.
And you're saying that's not the right process. Maybe that can come later, but first, it is figuring out that audience. It's figuring out what they want, what's going to really resonate with them. Because if you start selecting design elements before that, you're kind of cutting yourself off at the knees.
Yeah, so copying others is rarely a good idea, because they have a different audience, they have a different business model, they have different advantages. Like people talk to me about, well, Amazon's successful, just copy their website. No, it actually sucks. Their advantage is one-click checkout and the fact that they have everything and you don't have to think about where to shop for it. And they have incredible logistics and can get it to you in 2 hours in many places, right? Immediate gratification. No one else can replicate that. So you're copying the wrong stuff. If you're copying their website, that's just the surface level stuff. You don't see their follow-up email communication. You don't see their returns process. You don't see their customer service call center. You're not seeing any of that stuff. And also, if they're smart, you're not having the same experience as I am, because they're personalizing it. So I can show you the best on average experience for a website, maybe, but the best experience is the best one for me as an individual, and for you as an individual, and for Corey as an individual. So without that personalization layer, you're not even seeing what I'm seeing. So how can you copy it?
I think you said a second ago when Josh was talking, you said that you have to take into consideration the cultural side of it as well. And one of the fascinating things with MWI, which I need to have you tear apart our website because it needs it right now. But
glad to help.
One of the things is that we've got MWI.com, and then we've got MWI.HK, which is our team in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinating with me. Again, I studied communications and anthropology. And so one of the things I've loved about building our team out there is going out and in person customizing or translating our sales pitch, not into another language, but into another culture.
Yes.
How do we translate this? Not, we think of language, but how do we sit? How do we use our hands? And when do we stand? And what tone do we use? Do we go up? Do we go down? So I've loved that process, and building that out was fascinating. It's also really fascinating with our website though, to see the different engagements that we get based on the layout. And then the content that we're producing for our social media here versus our social media there. It's really cool to me because it looks like a different brand in so many ways. When they publish content, it looks super cool and it looks Chinese or, Hong Kong, or how do you say that? I don't even know, but versus the content that we put here, which is a little, it's different. So that's something that's really important. But that goes to show, depending on if you're a local business that's trying to target people just in this city in Arizona, because you're a local business, your website needs to replicate that, versus if you're, broadly Arizona or the Western United States or the entire United States, right? You can't copy. It's not apples to apples. It's definitely apples to oranges. I guess, you can do whatever you want, but if you're wanting conversions to be as high as possible, then these are things you need to take into consideration, right?
Yeah, exactly right. And there's lots of layers to that, to the differences. I think it was Mark Twain that once said that England and America are two countries divided by a common language.
Yeah, seriously.
We sort of speak the same language, but it's, culturally it's miles apart, right? And Hong Kong, same thing. Now you're getting like a colony of England mixing with local Chinese culture. That's its own weird blend that doesn't even exist on the mainland, right? So there's all kinds of stuff. Or in the West, we're very individualistic. We think that the highest attainment is to be a self-actualized individual. And in communal cultures in the Far East, it's much more about the group field, about fitting in, about respecting ancestors and saving face. And you see that across the whole region. So, we come in there as brash Americans and we say, hey, you ready to do this deal? They're not going to respond.
Yeah, that and a lot of times people, when they say, how did you start an office in Hong Kong? What's the language? And I'm like, well, in Hong Kong, actually, most of the business that we do is in English.
Yeah.
But that does not mean that it's the same. It means that you were saying the same words, but even still, the words are a little different. So it's fascinating. So looking to the future now, when you're saying, the world's in an interesting place, right? It's the end of, we're recording this the last week, a couple of days before the end of 2020, which has been a hoot to say the least. And you're looking to the future. What gives you, this is a real broad question, but based on everything we've heard from you and where your expertise lies in your life experience, what gives you hope for the future? Where are you seeing the most hope as we roll into a new year?
Well, it's hard to see it in the middle of this maelstrom that we're in on so many levels. I think people are individually and collectively suffering. And I was in one of my intentional circle groups, and one of the guys said this phrase. He said, "I'm not depressed, but I'm depression adjacent," which I thought was a great phrase. And what he meant by that, and I said, well, of course, because there's like this group field, the whole world is holding its collective breath and is going through a very aligned experience right now. It's rarely happened in history, but it's not an uptime, as you put it, as you mentioned. So I think that my hope is for kind of a transformation of consciousness. Again, I don't mean to sound too Californian, but
hey, you be your authentic self.
All right, well,
be as Californian as you need to be.
Yeah, this is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. I actually don't know what age we're coming into or whatever, but unless, I know this is going to sound like a very pessimistic, optimistic thing, but unless we change our course, we're driving off the sustainability cliff. The planet can't support people 8 billion people acting like we're acting now. That's a fact. It's just, it doesn't matter, whether we drive a Prius or if we eat, fake meat burgers instead of killing cows. There's just too many people wanting too much of a lifestyle. And unless our values get changed, that's just not sustainable. It's going to lead to ecological and civilization collapse. And I don't feel good for my kids, frankly, if we continue down this path. So I think what I'm hopeful for is a change in consciousness. So actually, I want to kill the entrepreneurs. I want to kill the freaking marketers. Because think about it, well, let's get back to normal. We can get back to a positive growth rate. That means we eat up more resources. We're like this plague of locusts on eating the whole planet, right? It's like, let's get back to that. Let's belching pollution. Let's get back to underpaying, kids in sweatshops in China. Let's get back to normal. And if you actually look under the hood of what normal means, it's not something that I hope the world would strive towards. It's something that we should be running away from. And you can see that. You see like the tiny house movements and millennials being less into possessions and more into experiences. You're seeing this kind of seeds of this being planted all over the world. Greta Thunberg, that the global climate change activist, who's like 16. And I just hope that army arrives in time to save us. So that's my hope.
And this is something I've loved to see as well, which is this drive away from materialism and material possessions and bigger is better. It seems like that kind of, I don't know when that peaked or if it has peaked, but it kind of feels like it peaked in the 80s and 90s or something. And then when we got into the 2000s, people started to wake up and say like, wait a second, do I really want to live in a mansion? Remember that show, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous?
Yeah.
It was like everybody wanted that. And now today, for the first time, it's becoming trendy to say, you know what? I don't want that. Like, even if I could have that, even if I'm a billionaire, I don't want the big house. I don't want 10 cars. I don't want all this stuff. And like the tiny house movement you mentioned, and people just having a smaller footprint and stuff like that.
Apartments, intentional community living, shared spaces, things like that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love seeing that move away, especially with the young people, the millennials and Gen Z and all this stuff, that they're kind of throwing that back and saying, and I feel like, I kind of wonder though, if we ever could have reached this point without having gone through that extreme materialism, in order to then come back and say, you know what, we tried that and it's not that great. And I don't need that to live. I don't need that to be happy. I don't need that to survive. I can live with a lot less. And maybe things like friends and family and relationships mean a lot more than chasing all these relationships. I mean, we've convinced everybody that everybody has to work 60 hours a week. Moms, dads, everybody has to be doing this. And it's like, now I've taken a step back over the past few years. I work from home. My wife's at home. Like, we're both at home all day with our kids. We're homeschooling and stuff. It's like, yeah, I could probably make more money and do more stuff if I went to an office, but what would I be giving up? I'd be giving up these relationships. And for what? Like, what would I get for giving that up? It feels like we're having this collective waking up. But I just wonder if we could be going through this wake up, if we hadn't gone through kind of pushing that boundary in the 80s and 90s, it seems like.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think that we have to suffer through the pain. So actually, my hope for this past year of the pandemic is that it's not a lost year or a wasted year, and we just kind of restart everything and go back to quote unquote normal again. I really hope it's painful enough to kind of kick us into a different trajectory. So that's another kind of related hope that will help with the big hope. And you're right, relationships are by far the most important thing. I have a whole section of the book called Hypersocial. And we can't live without relationships, not just because we're herd animals like other mammals, but as human beings in particular. The worst thing you can do to people is isolate them. And there's this longitudinal study of Harvard kids and poor kids from South Boston that's been running for like 70 years. And what they found contributes to wellness and health and everything else, satisfaction in life, is your degree of social connectedness, by far the most important thing. That not having strong social support is the medical equivalent of being a 2-pack a day smoker. Think about that. So, it's just absolutely critical that we focus on our relationships, and that presupposes a sense of empathy and connectedness instead of, it's like, my right not to wear a mask. Well, it's not all about individuals. It's we're all connected, whether you want to acknowledge it or not.
Well, I hope one good thing that comes out of this pandemic is that we appreciate those relationships more. Having been forced to isolate, I hope that I know I do. I'm always the guy who's like, I'm fine being in my office and just doing everything through email and stuff. But this lockdown has made me appreciate more being able to meet with people in person and see their face with my actual physical eyes, not just over a screen. And I hope
I'll go one step further. Give them a big, long hug. 20-second skin contact releases oxytocin. That's that mother-child bond, the feeling of safety, all of that. So I know a lot of Americans aren't huggers. I'm, again, a Russian, so we culturally do it automatically. But yeah, physical contact is critical.
All right. Next time I see you in person, Tim, I'm going to expect a big hug from you.
I'm up for it. Let's do it.
Thanks so much for talking with us here today, Tim. Where's the best place for people to find you?
Pretty easy. If you're interested in my keynote speaking, I do that all over the world on a variety of subjects, or solo internet consulting, marketing consulting. That's timash.com. And if you're interested in my latest book, Unleash Your Primal Brain, which is already out in paper or in ebook and audiobook narrated by me, and will be out in paperback shortly, just go to primalbrain.com.
All right. Thanks so much, Tim, for being with us today on the Hope Strategy podcast and sharing your thoughts with us.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, gentlemen.
Thanks, Tim.
Here's to a great 2021.
Yeah, 2021. We look forward to seeing you in person at some point. Awesome.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. Talk soon.
Bye.
Hello, it's Corey here, and I just want to thank you so much for listening into the Hope Strategy podcast. I hope you're enjoying it as much as we are enjoying having these amazing conversations with these incredible individuals talking about hope. We'd love it if you wouldn't mind liking, subscribing, and leaving us a review on iTunes or Spotify or anywhere that you listen to your podcasts, and share it with anybody you feel that can benefit from these messages of hope. Thank you so much for listening to the Hope Strategy podcast.